All right, back on the record in the Simpson matter. Mr. Simpson's present before the court with his counsel, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Scheck, Mr. Blazier, people represented by Ms. Clark, Mr. Goldberg, and Mr. Kellberg. Morning, counsel.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We're ready to proceed with Mr. Bodziak?
I'm sure that we are, Your Honor. Could Mr. Blazier and I speak to the court very briefly on a scheduling matter without the reporter at sidebar?
Sure.
We need all the exhibits that we had here last Friday. I don't know if they've been brought up, the various boards.
They're on their way.
Okay. Well, when they come up, we'll be ready.
All right, Mrs. Robertson, what's the status of the exhibits? All right, counsel, anything else we can resolve before we have get started with Mr. Bodziak again?
There's a couple things, Your Honor, if you might. In the interest of moving the case along, once the prosecution is finished, I would like to ask the assistance of the prosecution and the court in making the following witnesses available for us. We need Detective Van Adder. We need FBI Agent Martz. We need both Fiata brothers, FBI Agent Michael Wax, W-A-C-H-S, I guess, Deputy District Attorney Dale Davidson, and we need Mr. Gary Sims back. The court will recall that we said we were going to call Gary Sims very briefly on a matter we approached sidebar on, if you recall. Those are the witnesses that we need to have available that I think they have some control over, and we can move quickly to begin the balance of our case and then our rebuttal.
All right, Ms. Clark.
I'm puzzled about Gary Sims, Your Honor. Perhaps that was a sidebar I was not present for. But with respect to Agent Martz, let me indicate this. The witness is Mr. Whitehurst. Agent Martz is irrelevant until the court rules on the admissibility of Agent Whitehurst. And so I think we need to have that motion first. And then, depending on the court's ruling, we will discuss the availability of Agent Martz. At this time, there is no reason to do so at all. If the court will recall, the defense rested conditionally subject to the admissibility of Agent Whitehurst. And Agent Martz has no relevant testimony to give unless and until the court rules on the admissibility of Agent Whitehurst's testimony.
Unfortunately, Ms. Clark, after she promised to be here Saturday, was not here. And we have now talked to Agent Whitehurst, and we have further questions based upon newly discovered evidence of Agent Martz. They can't tell us which witnesses we want to call. We want Agent Martz. We want Detective Van Adder. It's all newly discovered evidence. We want the Fiata brothers. We want Dale Davidson. And with regard to Gary Sims, the court will recall, Mr. Barry Scheck asked the court to allow regarding the
I recollect that
so,
Mr. Sims was released
right,
subject
so that
to
was
recall.
it. So we, as the court has all said so many times, we have a right to present our case, and have an absolute right to do that. We have not arrested, and this is newly discovered evidence, and we want to have him out here. Now, if he's our witness, we don't mind paying for him, but we just want to have it facilitated so we don't have any downtime with regard to getting this witness out here.
Your Honor, if I could respond, because I was here both Saturday and Sunday. Mr. Cochran was not here Sunday. Both days were used to interview Dr. Whitehurst. And our position is quite simply, Dr. Whitehurst has a perspective about Agent Martz. And the question is anything that Dr. Whitehurst has to offer relevant to these proceedings?
Well, I assume we're going to take up that issue after we have concluded with Mr. Bodziak. I take it this is the prosecution's last witness. All right, then the
So the question is,
defense then has the opportunity to conclude their case, which I assume they're going to do.
but our position with Martz is not to have this man have to fly out here just so we can have a motion that his testimony be excluded until the court rules on Whitehurst's testimony, because if, as
Well,
we submit...
let's assume for the sake of the argument, Mr. Kelberg, that there is a possibility that Martz could be recalled for matters regarding the EDTA testing that have nothing to do with Whitehurst. I mean, that's a possibility as well, don't you agree?
Except not for the defense's case, because as I recall the court's statements, the court indicated it was allowing the defense not to rest its case in chief due to this limited area, and that the court would limit it to this area, as a result of which the court said to the prosecution, start your rebuttal. If this is a matter of EDTA, and we have not on rebuttal, offered anything on EDTA, then their case in chief
Well,
is...
that's another legal issue.
All right, but the long and short is just the geographics involved. Does Agent Martz have to fly out here to sit until this court rules on Mr. Whitehurst? If we know when, it should be Dr. Whitehurst, if we know when the court anticipates ruling on Dr. Whitehurst, then we can have arrangements available so that Mr. Martz can do his work back at Washington.
Well, counsel, my understanding is that the court reporters will have the transcripts of both Saturday and Sunday's interviews available sometime, I hope, by the end of today. Ms. Moxham is indicating that's correct.
Your Honor, may I just indicate as follows?
So that indicates to me that we will probably, if counsel have the transcripts by the close of business today, that they'll be able to proceed with an offer of proof and argument regarding Dr. Whitehurst probably tomorrow, and we can resolve some of these issues.
Might I just indicate, the reason I brought this up, Your Honor, is the court is aware, those of us who've been here every day in this trial are very much aware of this jury, that we want to get the case to the jury. And I'm trying to see...
Counsel, you don't need to tell me that.
Okay. I'm just pointing this out, Your Honor, because of the fact that we have people who don't always appear here. And I'm trying to point out to you, I want Martz here. They can't tell us how to try our case. We want Martz here, and we think we can recall Martz before we ever get to the Whitehurst issue. And so I want to make sure you listen to them, that that's our issue, that we believe Martz shouldn't be called first.
As soon as we finish with Bodziak, I suspect the people will get up and say, subject to court's permission to reopen if anything else comes up, they rest their rebuttal case. Then focus turns on the defense.
Fine. I was giving you a heads up. That was all it was.
Okay, thank you.
Your Honor, may I be excused?
Don't go too far away, because I don't know how long we're going to have with Mr. Bodziak.
I'll be upstairs. I can be reaching Mr. Hodgman's office.
All right. All right, Mr. Scheck, why don't you and Miss Clark check with Mrs. Robertson then, make sure all the exhibits are here ready to go, and as soon as they are, we'll get started. All right? Exhibits ready?
I believe we do, Your Honor.
All right, Deputy Trier, let's have the jury, please. jury panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Mr. Bodziak, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, let the record reflect that Mr. William Bodziak is again on the witness stand undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Scheck. Good morning again, Mr. Bodziak.
Good morning.
Mr. Bodziak, sir, you were reminded that you were still under oath, and Mr. Scheck, you may continue with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Good morning, Agent Bodziak. How are
morning.
you today, sir?
Fine.
Agent Bodziak, I think you indicated to us on Friday that your knowledge of the extent to which Dr. Lee actually goes to crime scenes and inspects imprint evidence, shoe print evidence, is somewhat limited.
Yes, I stated what knowledge I had about Dr. Lee on Friday.
Are you aware that this Saturday, Dr. Lee investigated a crime scene involving imprint evidence in Kennebunkport, Maine?
Sustained. Sustained. It's irrelevant.
At the request of the FBI?
It's irrelevant.
Now, we left off discussing reasons, I believe, on Friday, that the imprints on the envelope and the piece of paper, in your opinion, could not possibly have come from a shoe.
That's correct.
And I believe we discussed on Friday your views that the non-printing area around the imprints and the lack of a border were factors you considered in reaching your conclusion that it could not have possibly come from a shoe.
That's a part of the factors, yes.
Yes. And I believe you told us that although you recalled seeing 95% of Dr. Lee's testimony, you did not see his testimony about the blood patterns on the envelope and the basis for his belief that the parallel line imprints were made first and other blood stains were deposited later.
I didn't see that, nor do I believe it has anything to do with whether or not that is a shoe print.
I understand. Now, have you, since we last discussed this on Friday, made any effort to read or review that testimony of Dr. Lee?
No, I haven't.
We also had a discussion at the end of the day on Friday about whether Agent Diedrich believed that the paper and the envelope were probably laying down when something landed on it and made those imprints on it. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
All right. Now, and at that time that we were discussing it, neither of us had Agent Diedrich's testimony right at hand.
Well, I know what Agent Dietrich's conclusion was and what his statement was. What I believe the significant statement in his testimony was that there had to be pressure.
Well, my only question to you, sir, is neither of us had that precise testimony at hand.
No.
Okay. Now, I'd like to read you something and ask from Agent Diedrich's testimony on this
Sure.
issue and ask if you agree with it. All right? Sure. It's from the real time, so. And do you want to look along? This is to Mr. Diedrich. And on Mr. Goldman's jeans, you saw areas where it was saturated. Answer, it appeared to be. Now, question. Now, another scientific fact, or would you agree that another scientific fact about these imprints is that they were in blood, but also that the imprint on the envelope, the piece of paper, and the jeans actually are static? That is, they show evidence of little movement. Answer, Well, it's difficult to say with the genes, because I think I have already testified that it might be a swiping or moving type motion that may have caused that. But the papers is probably static. I think the papers were sitting and then something landed on it. Recall that?
Yes.
Question. So you would agree that in terms of the observation also, that we could agree it's a scientific fact that the bloody imprints were made and impressed with relatively little movement? Answer, yeah, that's reasonable. I don't really know the dynamics, nor could I say with 100% certainty what the dynamics of this were of this, but it was probably laying down and something landed on that one area. Do you recall him saying that?
Yes.
Question. And you would think that would be the most reasonable interpretation of how the imprint got on the paper and how it got on the envelope. Answer, yeah, that's more logical than having the paper float down and land on something, and I think it's more reasonable. Do you recall Agent Dietrich saying that?
Yes.
All right. Now, do you disagree with that?
No, I totally agree. May I
Okay.
explain?
All right.
No, he said, I totally agree. Next question.
All right. And then there was further discussion, just to read it all. Question. But it would be fair to rule out, in terms of your interpretation, that the imprint, for example, on the envelope or the piece of paper could have come about with the envelope or piece of paper hitting the jeans and then falling to the ground. Answer, I don't know. I think I said that it seems reasonable that the papers were laying flat and then contact occurred, causing the imprint pattern. That seems to me logical. Excuse me. But there has to be some force, some resistance to that contact, so the paper, if it were not on the ground, would have had to have been against something so that the imprint occurred. It wouldn't be floating. It would either have to be either held or on something else. Question. When you and I were talking before, we were operating on your premise that this could have come from Mr. Goldman's genes, these two imprints. That, didn't you indicate, or aren't you saying, that you felt it unlikely that either the piece of paper or the envelope could have gotten these imprints if they had just touched the genes? Answer, yeah, I think I've already testified to that too. Yes. Fair
Yes.
enough?
Yes.
Okay. Now, without repeating the entire discussion, can we agree that on direct examination you told us that you did not believe these parallel line imprints on the envelope and paper were typical of the parallel line imprints one expects to see from shoes?
That's correct.
However, it would be fair to say that there are many parallel line imprints in shoe patterns.
Yes, there are.
And you have a computerized database of shoe patterns at the FBI.
Yes, I do.
And that was the computerized database that you consulted when you were looking for the Bruno Magli's.
That's correct.
And I guess as of Friday, you had not reviewed that database looking for the parallel line imprint on this envelope, yes or no?
No, I would not.
And over the weekend, you have not done that either, have you?
No, I would not.
Now, there were test imprints of the genes that were created in this case.
It's my understanding that Doug Diedrich prepared some when he was out here, and I know there were some prepared prior to his coming, yes.
Right, and one set were done on August 21st at the LAPD lab by LAPD personnel, and some were prepared on August 31st.
I don't know the exact dates, but it was in August, yes.
Right. 2 on August 21st and 5 on August 31st.
Okay.
And, Your Honor, we don't have the, upstairs they have the full set of imprints, but what I have here are Xeroxes of the actual imprints in 2 pieces of paper. They appeared in 1 piece of paper. So, for the sake of expediting things, could we mark these 2 documents, defendants next in order, and then we'll later substitute it with the full imprint pad, if that's okay.
1376. And this is going to be test impression from the jeans.
Test impressions from the jeans.
Do you know what date that was taken?
I'm
Is this
sorry?
Is this the LAPD or the FBI?
These are the ones that were done by the LAPD and sent to the FBI that form the basis for the boards.
All right, these are the 821 impressions.
They're 831 and
821 or 831?
they're all dated on the paper.
821 or 831?
There's one on 830, there's one on 831, another on 830, another on 830, another on 830, and another on 830 in the 2 pages I have.
All right, multiple dates. All right, thank you.
But they're each labeled. Have you seen these test impressions before?
These are of the jeans, yes. They have actually my initials on them because they passed through me. Yes.
Okay. Now, Your Honor, may I put these on the Elmo?
Yes.
Agent Bodziak, the manner in which these test impressions are created is that the jeans are laid flat on the surface.
I wasn't present when these were prepared.
Have you seen subsequently pictures of how they were done?
No, I have not.
Well, let him show you what he's going to show you first.
Well, I gave them. Let me just establish this while Ms. Clark is looking at the various pictures. Are you aware that pictures were taken of the process by which these test impressions were made at the LAPD laboratory?
Objection, that's misleading.
Only now that you've just told me, no.
Okay. And would it be,
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
did you have any, withdrawn. Would it have been was it your recommendation that the manner in which these test impressions be made, that the jeans are laid flat, and then this yellow pad, this palm print chemical pad is placed on the jeans, and rolled, and then subsequently a white piece of paper is put on the jeans, and then these impressions are made by the interaction of the chemicals from the yellow pad onto the white piece of paper? Is that how it works?
I wasn't present when they were made. I didn't direct the obtaining of these impressions.
Well, you sent the identicator kit to the LAPD,
Yes, I did.
and you have testified that you've used this yourself for purposes of taking impressions of soles of shoes and I think socks whereby people step on them.
Right, that's correct.
Now, is the method that when you sent this identicator kit to the LAPD, did you direct them that the method of creating the test impression would be to lay the jeans flat and then place the yellow palm print pad on it and roll it and then place the papers on it.
I've never used a roller, so I know I would not have recommended that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but with shoes and socks, it's easy to wear them and step on the object.
Why wouldn't you have recommended the roller in this case?
Well, it's not that it wouldn't in the case of a fabric. I don't conduct fabric examinations, so I don't get into that kind of a problem. But there would be nothing wrong with using a roller. You're getting a representative sample of the jeans. But I'm more used to taking the object and pressing it on the pad and then onto the paper because I deal with shoes and socks.
You ready?
Well, are you going to use any of these at this point, Mr. Scheck?
Well, I'm going to show him these pictures.
All right, sidebar with court reporter, please. All right, thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Your Honor, I'd like these next two documents to be marked defendants 1337. It's two LAPD reports.
1377.
Objection, no foundation.
1377.
There's no foundation for this time. Seriously.
Just showing to the witness, Your Honor.
Proceed. It's marked 1377.
1377. Thank you.
1377.
Agent Bodziak, I show you two documents marked 1377. Now, in your work as an expert witness, is it your practice generally to rely upon descriptions of procedures used by other laboratory personnel in preparing items that you will inspect for purposes of making comparisons?
Objection, irrelevant. And
Overruled.
what's the purpose of showing the documents?
Overruled.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Sure. In the course of rendering an expert opinion on the basis of making comparisons of imprints, is it your general practice to rely upon the documents and laboratory procedures of other police personnel or scientific personnel who you direct to do certain work?
With regard to impressions? You mean if they take impressions and then send them to us to make an examination?
Yes.
In some cases.
And when you receive both impressions and police reports or scientific memorandum indicating how they were prepared, it's your general practice to rely upon the scientific personnel's records of how they were prepared.
You certainly would read that and take it into consideration, yes.
All right. And in this instance, the two documents I showed you, do they reflect the reports of the LAPD personnel with respect to how they created the test impressions for the genes?
Objection, hearsay, speculation, no
Overruled.
foundation.
I'd have to finish reading them.
Please take your time and examine them.
Okay, I've read them.
And based on these documents, as a basis for your expert opinion, would you rely on the fact that...
Counsel, we're missing a few things, aren't we?
Missing a few things at this point? Would you regard these reports as reports that would ordinarily be relied upon by an expert such as yourself as a basis for rendering an expert opinion?
Objection, that calls for speculation. There's no foundation. People would ask to take it on voir dire principle.
Overruled.
In most cases, if we were sent test impressions, and I can only speak for shoes because I don't do fabric exams, which is what you're asking about, but with regard to shoes, we are many times sent test impressions of shoes, and we may be able to do a comparison, like an elimination type comparison with those. If it was the same design of the shoe impressions in question, of course, we would expect that they would send in the shoes, and we would not do any exam at that point, except a preliminary exam, perhaps on class characteristics. And I think that's what's done in this case. I've never seen anyone so thorough as to write a report attached with those impressions as to how they were taken. So I can't reference any other instance.
Well, you saw the boards created with respect to the test impressions of Mr. Goldman's genes.
Yes.
and you looked at those and compared them with the imprints on the envelope and the piece of paper.
You're referring to the boards, meaning the exhibits?
Well, the exhibits that Agent Diedrich prepared, the actual envelope yourself, you yourself made a visual comparison between the test impressions created by the LAPD that were used for the boards and the actual imprints on the envelope.
No. The sequence of events is this. I had the envelope with the impression on it. I had a picture of the triangular piece of paper with an impression on it. I had the jeans which were photographed, which I had previously examined for footwear impressions, and determined that there were only two possible ones, and none of those are the parallel lines you're referring to. In looking at the characteristics of the small little fingerprint size or smaller fingerprint size parallel lines on the envelope and the piece of triangular paper, I referred that to Mr. Diedrich because I believed they might be fabric impressions.
Your Honor, I don't think this is responsive. The question I'm asking you, sir, simply is,
Counsel, it was a responsive answer.
I'm asking him if he saw the test impressions. He's
He's
telling me
explaining.
everything before that.
He's explaining it. Ask your next question.
All right. Mr. Bodziak,
Ask your next question.
Mr. Bodziak, simply asking you, sir, did you visually examine the test impressions created by the LAPD and used by Mr. Diedrich for his boards to the parallel line imprints on the envelope and the piece of paper? Did you do that?
I did not conduct an examination. They passed through my hands, but I did not conduct an examination.
So you're telling us that you never looked at them?
I looked at them, but it was a fabric examination. Mr. Diedrich does that. I don't.
Well, in the course of your testimony on Friday, did you not express a view that you thought that the imprints on the envelope and the piece of paper were likely to have come from Mr. Goldman's jeans?
I expressed that as a possibility through common sense and what I have seen in the case, yes.
But you're telling us that you expressed that opinion without yourself actually having compared the test impression, looked at them, the test impressions that were created, and then looked at the parallel line imprints on the envelope and the paper?
I'm not an expert in the area of fabric comparisons, and I did not conduct a final comparison, but I did see certain characteristics both in the photograph of the jeans themselves, and in those items which passed through my hands, and referred them to Agent Diedrich.
So the answer is yes, you looked at the test impression and compared them to the imprints.
Yes.
Okay.
Not in an examination way, but just a visual.
And
I saw them.
And was
Yeah.
that visual comparison, sir, part of the basis for the expert opinion that you rendered on Friday?
It's part of many things I saw in this case, which was, of course, the foundation for which I stated my opinion on Friday.
But that was part of your expert opinion.
That's correct.
And in rendering that expert opinion, would you not rely upon the documents created by the Los Angeles Police Department as documents that would be reliable and something that an expert such as yourself would rely upon in
You've
forming...
asked this question already.
Well, all right. Then let me proceed directly. Would you accept the representation in the
Excuse me, counsel,
LAPD?
Wait. Have you seen these reports before?
No, Your Honor.
End of inquiry.
Well,
It's not the basis of his opinion if he hasn't seen it before.
let me ask you this then. Ask you to assume that the test impressions were created by laying the jeans out flat, putting the yellow pad upon it, and rolling the yellow pad with a roller, putting a roller over the yellow pad, and then placing a piece of paper on top of it.
Overruled.
Are you with me?
I understand, yes.
Now, if that were to occur, would you not expect that the ridges creating the imprint, all right, on the paper, the ridges from the jeans, would be stretched out because the jeans were flat and there was a rolling of them?
Objection, Your Honor, this is beyond the scope of expertise.
You want to take him on voir dire?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Excuse me.
Well, Your Honor,
This is a shoe print expert, not a fabric expert.
he rendered an opinion based on the visual comparison.
He said he looked at it and passed it on.
All right, maybe I can shortcut this. Are you telling us that because you're a shoe print expert, not a fabric expert, you would not be able to and express an opinion about whether or not rolling the palm print pad on the jeans would tend to expand the distance between the ridges on the jeans, tend to spread them out?
I don't make test impressions of fabrics except socks, which would be worn with some kind of protection in between. So I couldn't answer that question based on my expertise and experience.
Now, Agent Bodziak, did you ever measure the distance between the ridges on the envelope and compare the distance between the ridges on the envelope to the distance between the ridges on the jeans in the test impressions?
Not with a measuring device, just with a side-by-side look at them in a preliminary sense prior to referring it to Agent Diedrich.
To your knowledge, has Agent Diedrich ever made those measurements?
I have no knowledge of the examination Agent Diedrich performed.
When you do shoe print comparisons, do you perform measurements on the distance between imprints that you see?
No, there's two things we do. We use a divider, which you would apply the points of the divider to one measurement, transfer that divider, which remains at a fixed point, to the other. But more commonly, we use an overlay technique where we would make a test impression of the shoe with a clear material and superimpose that over the question impression. That reduces any possibility of error in measurement. It's a more direct comparison.
Well, the first method that you described is you would take some kind, what are those devices called? Calipers of some kind?
Well, a caliper is a divider with a measurement scale on it. You only
Right.
need the divider.
Right.
You don't actually need a caliper.
So a caliper would be one of these devices where you would, it has 2 points on it, and you stick it between two things, and there's a little a device that shows you how far the distance is between the 2 points.
Not the ones I use. It just holds that position. You can lock it into that measurement.
There are some that have that measurement on it.
Yes.
And then there are the ones you use don't have a measurement on it, but you basically take the distance on one shoe imprint, and then using the same measure, you go over and look at the other one.
That's correct.
And that's a form, would you not agree, of measurement, even though you don't write down a precise number?
I believe it's more accurate than measurement, yes.
More accurate than?
Yes.
Okay. And so that and the use of overlays to try to show that the imprints are reasonably similar are techniques you use to demonstrate that one shoe imprint corresponds to the other.
In the comparison, it would be if they're similar or different. You can use that technique, yes.
Now, would you not agree, and can we put this up again? And with respect to the test imprint here, 1376, one sees at different points that the so-called inkless fingerprinting chemical, right, when pressed on to the jeans, there was ink, so to speak, that would go between the ridges of the jeans and show up on the imprint.
Objection, to be on the scope, speculation.
You're referring to the filling in between parallel lines and some...
Yes.
Yes, I can see that.
Okay. And would you not agree that the media used to do this test impression is not as thick as blood?
That's correct.
And would you agree from your examination of Mr. Goldman's genes that many areas of his genes were saturated with blood?
That's correct.
And I take it that you have never conducted experiments of imprints of fabric in blood.
As I previously stated, I'm not a fabric examiner.
Now, you said on direct examination that imprints made in big globs of blood get darker with time, but most tracks that are blood imprints that are light get lighter with time. Do you recall that testimony?
I don't think it was stated exactly that way.
Well, let me read you this and see if it refreshes your recollection. So most of the tracks are very, very light. The only exception would be if you actually stepped in a pool of blood. With regard to those shoe prints, which I encounter daily and have for my entire time in the FBI laboratory, they become lighter with time. With regard to whole blood or big globs of blood that are very thick, they tend to appear darker with time.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, so you are making a distinction here between imprints made with big globs of blood and imprints in blood that are thinner.
I'm making a distinction between a thick quantity of blood and a very thin, pressed out quantity of blood, and what the differences are that occur over time.
Okay. And you're saying that the ones that are thinner and pressed out will get lighter over time.
The footwear impressions that I incur daily, the typical scenario of what I get in a case is a crime occurs anywhere from 2 to 3 months away, and I have a case right now from 1980. I will get crime scene pictures taken the day of or the day after the murder showing these footwear impressions. I will also, in many cases, get scatter rugs, cut out pieces of carpeting, tile floors or linoleum floors that are rolled up and sent in with the actual impressions. I receive those and examine those on the average months later. In every instance, the thin shoe prints have all but disappeared. The real thick-blooded areas that are now flaking and crusting are darker.
Well, so now you're saying that these are imprints that you're looking at months later.
I believe that's what I said the other day.
All right. Now, I was looking, this is your book.
Yes, it is.
Impression Evidence. And I was looking over the weekend, and I was trying to find some passage in your book that discussed this phenomenon. Do you discuss this phenomenon anywhere in that book?
I don't know if there was an appropriate part where I actually said that. I talk about enhancement of blood impressions that are very faint. Obviously, if they were all darker with time, you wouldn't have to enhance them. But I don't know if I actually stated what you're asking specifically that way.
So there's, to the best of your knowledge, there's nothing in your book that corresponds with the testimony that you gave the jury on Friday about faint imprints in blood not getting darker but lighter over time.
Objection to relevant beyond the scope.
I don't know if there was a reason why I should state that. I spent a whole chapter talking on enhancement of faint impressions. Wouldn't be a reason to try to give reasons why they may be faint, but just that they are faint.
Well, you have chapters in here about awareness, detection, and treatment of footwear impression evidence.
That's correct.
And you actually have a section in here about impressions in blood.
That's correct.
And you are writing with the purpose of informing crime scene personnel as to what they can expect to encounter when they look at bloody imprints, perhaps from shoes at a crime scene.
I was addressing what they should do to retrieve those impressions and enhance those impressions, and to locate those impressions. To be aware that they could be light, they may miss them, and that those light ones have as much value as darker ones.
Well, you do devote considerable time in this book to identifying impressions made in blood.
Positive identification of footwear impressions.
I mean, in other words, when I mean identify, I mean criminalists going to the scene and actually recognizing the impressions.
The first chapter basically is generally on the detection and awareness and potential of footwear impression evidence, the fact that it occurs in many different ways and for many reasons, both in blood and other materials. Then the next 3 chapters go on how to retrieve it photographically through casting and lifting. And the 5th chapter is on the chemical enhancement, part of which is in blood.
Okay. Well, we'll review that in just a minute, but just on this one point, so we're very clear with the jury. You were saying then on Friday that when you have globs of blood,
Counsel, this will be the 3rd time we're going through this.
well, I just want to make clear,
No.
let me ask you
We've gone
this
through it.
question. Isn't blood from an imprint blood?
Could you restate that?
Yeah. When you make an imprint in blood, whether it's a glob or a thin imprint, the imprint is made in blood.
Well, you wouldn't have a... You may have misunderstood what I meant by glob. I'm talking about a body at a scene in which a lot of blood has been spilled. There will be pools of blood, and as they go through the changes before they become hard, they can get it to be rather gelatinous, or, you know, in different consistencies, particularly if the body is rolled over on, the bleeding is under the body. And in fact, when the remainder of the area where the blood is thinner has dried, if the body is rolled over, the areas under will still, in many instances, be tacky, and that pooling of blood, that thick blood, is what I'm talking about with what I meant when I said globs.
That's what you meant by globs. But
Yes.
what I'm directing your attention, sir, is to your assertion that faint imprints made in blood, that get lighter over time. You recall that?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, those faint imprints made in blood are nonetheless blood.
That's correct.
And blood has certain chemical properties.
Yes, it does.
And when protein breaks down in blood and bacterial degradation occurs, blood turns darker.
If it's in a thick quantity, you will see it turn color and darker. If it's thin, as I've stated, it will fade away due to, I guess, ultraviolet radiation and other things. But that's what I've seen in every case for 20 years.
Right, so you're saying that, but that's, you're talking about getting something months later.
The average case is probably 3 to 6 months from the time of the crime.
So 3 to 6 months is what you're
That's a
generally
rough
saying.
average. We don't keep statistics on that. I haven't averaged every case I worked, but I'm trying to give you a ballpark figure.
And imprints made on June 13th, or June 12th, I should say, and then looked at 13 days later on June 25th, that's not 2 to 3 months.
No, it's going to get lighter, though. I mean, I've gotten cases the same
But is
day
that-
when I was at the crime
only asked
scene.
you
Yes.
whether that was 2 to 3
But
months.
I want to be clear.
No. The answer was non-responsive.
That was,
Answer stands.
we agree on the dates, don't we?
Of
Between June 12th and June 25th,
Right. Yes, I do.
13 days.
Right.
Now, is there any serological reason, in terms of the properties of blood that you know of, that would prevent a thin, by your definition, imprint in blood being darker 13 days later than when it was left?
I can only, no, to answer your question, I am not a serologist. I can't give you the chemistry of blood. I can only testify to my experience.
Right. And your experiences, we've now clarified, is with faint impressions that you're seeing 2 or 3 months later.
Seeing them everything from the same day to, like I said, I have a case now from 1980. That's quite a distance. And in every case, they only get lighter with time.
Now, latent imprints are imprints that are not visible to the naked eye.
That's correct.
And shoe imprints made in blood can be latent.
That's correct.
And you agree, do you not, that the location of footwear impression evidence, primarily on ground surfaces, makes it sometimes difficult or inconvenient to find, particularly if the impressions are latent or nearly invisible. Specialized lighting and enhancement techniques are often required, along with an aggressive effort to find the impression.
That's correct.
And do you agree that before beginning the crime scene search, careful thought should be given to what occurred at the crime scene, how footwear impression evidence could contribute to the proof of facts, and what areas of the crime scene might contain footwear impression evidence? Then the footwear impression should be looked for aggressively and carefully. What is not looked for will not be found. You agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I wrote it.
And you agree that lack of success in finding footwear impressions at a crime scene is often due to the investigators not believing that latent footwear impressions will be found and not aggressively looking for them.
As a general statement, yes.
Now, the close-up pictures that you received from the Los Angeles Police Department of the Bundy Walkway area, close-ups now, were directed at the clearly visible bloody imprints that you later identified to be from Bruno Magli's shoes.
That's correct.
Now, do you agree that chemicals used for enhancement are very sensitive to small traces of blood?
No, objection. Objection, Your Honor. This is the court's ruling on
No, this is enhancement techniques, Your Honor.
objection.
Do you agree?
Yes, I do.
Therefore, in areas where blood impressions are very thin and faint, or where the subject has tracked through blood and left a series of blood impressions, enhancement methods can develop a latent or nearly invisible blood impression into a highly valuable impression. In fact, faint impressions, once enhanced, are normally more valuable and detailed than those containing larger quantities of blood.
In some instances, that is true, yes.
Now, have you ever recommended using as an enhancement technique dusting with a magna brush and fingerprint pattern?
Are we talking about the surfaces in this case or just in general?
In general.
In general, yes.
Do you know who holds the patent on the magna brush?
Objection, irrelevant. No.
Sustained.
Have you cited in your book Dr. Lee's work with the TMB enhancement technique as a very sensitive technique that will reveal faint and otherwise invisible traces of blood that works particularly well on light-colored surfaces where bluish-green color will often offer sufficient contrast?
Objection, hearsay, irrelevant,
Overruled.
beyond the scope.
Overruled.
I believe that was Nutt, Hazen, and Lee, an article they wrote on that, yes.
And you cited that?
Yes.
Page 158 to
Yes.
59
Yes.
159 in your book. Now, to your knowledge, did the LAPD make an effort to do enhancement of impressions following the trail of the Bruno Magli when the clearly visible footprints disappeared?
No, they didn't, not to my knowledge.
Objection, Your Honor, that's beyond the scope and don't so
Overruled.
misleading.
And do you not recommend in your book or do you not say in your book that very often the blood impressions containing the best detail are those made after excess blood is off the shoe?
In some instances.
Now, to your knowledge, did the LAPD attempt to use enhancement techniques in other areas of the Bundy walkway looking for footwear impression evidence on June 12th?
As I previously stated in my direct testimony, I'm not aware of any.
Thank you. And just so we're clear about what this would look like, just 1 second, Your Honor. Now, I'd like to show the witness. You, page 158 and 159 of your book, do you not show 3 photographs there that demonstrate how enhancement techniques can be used to bring out impressions made in blood that were either latent or nearly invisible and make very clear patterns?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, may I show these on the Elmo to the jury?
No objection. This is only relevant, Your Honor.
Sustain. Wasn't done. Sustain.
Well,
It's irrelevant.
Your Honor, I think it's...
Sustain.
Did you review Dr. Lee's testimony with respect to whether or not... Withdrawn. Do you recall Dr. Lee's testimony that when he went to the Bundy crime scene and was examining for footwear impressions on June 25th, that he had about 20 minutes and he was not allowed to use enhancement techniques?
Objection. That's hearsay. Calls for speculation.
This is testimony.
Did you hear the testimony?
I heard it, Your Honor. I just don't remember the exact quote of what he said.
Do you remember that to be the substance of what he said?
I really don't remember exactly what was said about that. I was more looking at the visuals of the footwear impressions.
So that's another part of the 5% of his testimony that you don't recall hearing.
I just can't remember the quote.
I'm asking you about the substance.
Well, if I can't remember the quote, sir,
You
I
can't
can't
remember
remember the substance.
Okay.
Mr. Scheck? 10:30.
Now, I'd like to use a...
Mr. Harris? And Mr. Scheck, which exhibit is this?
I'm sorry? Oh, yes.
Mr. Harris, which exhibit
I
is
think this must be 1337, if I recall. Is that right, Mr. Harris?
this? Right, 1337.
Now, I've taken out the board 1337 entitled Imprint Evidence at Bundy. You see that, sir?
Yes.
Now, I believe you testified on Friday or Thursday, I can't recall which, that you were confused in watching Dr. Lee's testimony, and you were sure other people were confused whether he was referring to shoe prints when he used the term imprint on many occasions.
That's correct.
And you indicated that you were here to clarify Dr. Lee's testimony so it's not misleading.
Well, I think that the effect of my testimony is to do that to some extent, yes.
Now, do you remember Dr. Lee's testimony on direct examination with respect to the photograph at the far left-hand bottom corner of 1337 that was taken on June 13th by the Los Angeles Police Department?
Yes, I do.
Objection. Anything is a date, Your Honor.
Overruled.
If counsel is proposing to read, may I see what he proposed?
Yes.
Yes.
42772.
Objection under 356 and 352 is misleading. I ask that you could...
Whose testimony is this?
This is Dr. Lee's.
Ask the question.
Now, with respect to that picture, the bottom left-hand corner of 1337,
What's the labeling on the bottom of it?
it's indicating walkway 612-1394. Do you recall seeing, because you saw Dr. Lee's testimony in videotape, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall seeing or hearing Dr. Lee testify on direct examination to the following? And I'm starting, Your Honor, at page 42772 of this transcript. Question. And incidentally, Dr. Lee, with respect to the parallel line imprint pattern that you identified for us on this June 12th, June 13th walkway photograph, in theory, is it possible that the imprint pattern could arise from an imperfection in the tile? Answer, it could be, because I only look at a picture. I myself did not have an opportunity to go there, identify the tile. It could be anything. What? I don't want to mislead people. And ladies and gentlemen, say that is a shoe print. By no means, I did not say that is a shoe print, just a partial imprint with some parallel lines.
Question.
Do you recall him saying that?
Yes, I do.
That was on direct examination.
That's correct.
Do you regard that as in any way misleading to this jury?
My statement about misleading was in context to his whole testimony.
Asking about this.
In this one, I think he clarified it that if he had inferred before by saying it was an imprint, that he meant it was a shoe print. He was saying later on that it wasn't a shoe print
But
with
listen.
regard to this particular one.
Direct examination, the section I just read you with respect to that picture, to recall that testimony, my question to you very simply is, do you regard that answer on direct examination as an effort to confuse the mislead this jury in any way?
Objection, Your Honor, under 356 and 352 is misleading.
Overruled. Restate the question. The way the question is stated, it's argumentative.
Okay. With respect to the section I just read you from Dr. Lee's direct examination with respect to that picture, do you believe that in this question and answer, Dr. Lee was misleading or confusing anyone?
Not with regard to that particular statement, no.
Now, do you recall that when this issue then arose on cross-examination, what Dr. Lee said about it?
No, I don't have this committed to memory. I saw most of this, but I don't have his quotes committed to memory, sir.
Well, I'm not asking you about quotes, I'm asking you about substance. Do you recall the substance of what he said on this?
It's my opinion from what I saw that he admitted that these could be trowel marks in the sidewalk or imperfections in the sidewalk. But I don't remember his quote exactly.
All right. Second, I'm sorry, Your Honor. To save some time, do you recall that Mr. Goldberg showed Dr. Lee an enlarged picture of that tile?
Objection, Your Honor. Objection, that states the testimony. Small.
Sustain. Phrase the question.
Do you recall that Mr. Goldberg showed Dr. Lee a picture which Dr. Lee remarked was a better picture than one that had been available to him?
I don't remember that part exactly. Again, maybe because it wasn't part I saw, or I just don't recollect that far back.
And do you recall that when Dr. Lee was shown that photograph, he immediately told Mr. Goldberg, yes, this is a better picture than I had, and looking at that tile, I now agree the most reasonable interpretation is that those parallel line imprints came from the etchings in the tile.
No objection, that misstates the testimony.
Sustained.
I'll get back to this after the break. Now, with respect to this is 1337B, and that is, you agree, a blow-up of the middle photograph entitled Walkway 62594 on 1337.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Lee identified a parallel line pattern that he entitled PLP,
Yes.
and he indicated that by way of tests and observations that he made on June 15th, that this was an imprint in blood.
I don't believe I recall him calling it conclusively in blood.
But consistent with an imprint in blood based on his tests and observations at the scene.
I don't recall that specific part of it.
Sustained.
Let me ask you this question, very simply, yes or no. Do you agree that this parallel line imprint pattern identified by Dr. Lee is consistent with having come from footwear?
I don't believe, as I previously stated, that you can look at that area and say any of that has positively come from footwear. It could, but it wasn't there on June 13th.
Move to strike the last part of this answer is non-responsive.
Stricken is non-responsive. Last part.
Simple question, yes or no.
You can't tell from that partial of an impression, and I've stated that on direct.
But did you not state on direct that, in your opinion, this parallel line imprint pattern could come from footwear?
It could have come from footwear.
And isn't it your understanding that that's what Dr. Lee said as well?
As I recall, he referred to that area as a parallel line imprint, and he was asked many times about it on both sides and said it could have come from a shoe. I don't believe he conclusively said that it came from a shoe.
Right. He said just what you just said.
Right.
Now, with respect to this wiggly line that one sees above the Bruno Magli. See that?
The wavy line,
The wavy line.
yes.
Well, did not on direct examination, Dr. Lee simply refer to that as wiggly line pattern?
That sounds correct, yes.
And he did not circle that.
Not there, no.
And Mr. Goldberg asked him some extensive questions about that on cross-examination. Do you recall that?
It calls for a conclusion as to what's extensive.
Did he ask Dr. Lee some questions about this wavy line pattern on cross-examination?
I don't remember how many he asked him, but he questioned him about that, yes.
Right. And when he was questioned about it on cross-examination, did Dr. Lee indicate that he had performed tests on the parallel line pattern, but could not recall any tests being performed on the wavy lines?
No objection, that misstates the testimony by it.
Overruled.
Well, again, I'm not able to memorize all of that testimony. I saw parts of it. Parts on the East Coast were cut out, and a lot of it I don't recollect because it's been some time. So I'm not going to get into the quote game. I'm sorry, I just can't remember that.
You, on direct examination, indicated that this wiggly line pattern was an imperfection in the sidewalk.
It's a shoe print in concrete.
Shoe
in the
print in
sidewalk,
concrete.
yes.
All right. And this was passed out to the jury, and this was all pointed out to them, right? As a
That's-
shoe print in concrete.
That's correct.
And when you did that, or when that was done, Were you in any way trying to represent to the jury that Dr. Lee had maintained that this wavy line pattern was an imprint made in blood?
Are you asking me my intent of explaining all of these, or just this one specifically?
When you did that, were you aware that Dr. Lee had never represented to this jury that this wavy line pattern was an imprint made in blood?
I don't recall him saying, anything that I saw, I don't recall him saying it was made in blood, no.
And in fact, to the best of your recollection, his testimony was directed just to the parallel line pattern as an imprint made in blood that could be consistent with the shoe, just as he drew it in this picture.
You're asking me about quotes about him talking about things conclusively made in blood. I don't remember that part of it. I remember the parallel lines as possibly being a shoe print. I don't remember the blood portion.
And the parallel lines possibly coming from a shoe print that he drew, Dr. Lee said, with respect to that, exactly what you said here today.
Which is, it's parallel lines that could have been made by a shoe.
Right.
With the exception that I'm saying,
No, is that
okay.
right?
Objection, Your Honor. That's
No,
You
no.
can finish the answer, Counsel.
Well, if he's going to start saying
You
about...
can finish the answer. That's the way you asked the question.
No.
Have you finished your answer?
No, sir.
Finish your answer.
Except that I also determined that that impression was not present on the June 13th photographs, which
Right.
were very detailed photographs.
Right? And Dr. Lee simply said that he observed this on June 25th.
That's correct.
And, well, I think that's enough. It's 10:30.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our mid-morning recess at this time. Remember, all my admonitions to you will stand at recess for 15.
Please clear the court.
Stand, please. All right, Mr. Scheck, you may resume your cross-examination.
And hopefully conclude, Your Honor.
Amen.
Now, Agent Bodziak, the picture to the far right on 1337 and the blow-up, which is marked 1337A, you recall this one?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Scheck, could you just give me the labeling on the 1337?
It's called Walkway 62594, but it's the one on the lower right-hand corner, and 1337B is the blow-up that's labeled with the circle PLP-SP, standing for shoe print.
Yes.
Now, you recall Dr. Lee's testimony with respect to this particular imprint pattern.
Yes.
And you recall that he testified that in his opinion, this parallel line imprint pattern was a shoe print.
Yes.
Do you agree that this is a shoe print?
It's more than likely a shoe print. I mean, it looks very much like a shoe print, but it's, again, partial.
Well, in your opinion, then, it's more than likely a shoe print.
Yes, yes.
So you would agree in that respect with Dr. Lee that this is a parallel line imprint that's more than likely a shoe print?
Yes.
Now, is this one of the kinds of imprint patterns that you believe would get lighter over time as opposed to darker?
What is it composed of?
Well, Dr. Lee testified that based on his tests and observations at the
Objection,
scene...
Your Honor. Objection.
What's the objection?
Test, Your Honor.
Oh, if they're going to imply it's not,
Objection.
can we approach sidebar?
Sustain. The objection is sustained. Rephrase the question.
All right. Dr. Lee testified based on the work he did at the crime scene and his observations that he believed that that parallel line imprint was made in blood. Where that?
Same objection, what you did.
Overruled.
Yes.
Now, if we assume that that is indeed made in blood, would you believe that that imprint pattern is the kind that would get lighter over time, and here I'm talking about a period of 13 days, would it get lighter over 13 days or darker?
If this particular impression was an impression made on June 13th in blood, it would only get lighter.
And do you have any, and it's your testimony that this would get lighter?
Absolutely.
And you're saying that these, assuming that there was an imprint pattern made on June 12th in blood with this configuration,
Yes.
is it your testimony that the lines in blood would not break down in terms of the proteins and the bacterial degradation, and those lines get darker?
Well, the first part I would agree with. They would degrade, as any blood would, when exposed to the weathering and time, particularly over that time period. But based on my experience in casework, as well as blood impressions, which I prepare for classes and then maybe don't use for 9 months later, purposely to make them light, for chemical enhancement in those classes, they always turn lighter, without
Well,
exception.
You just mentioned 9 months.
They gradually get lighter with time, sir. Doesn't matter what the time frame is. As more time goes by, they will get lighter.
And can you, now we're talking now just to 13 days, you realize that?
Yes.
And can you tell us what scientific, chemical, serological properties is the basis for your opinion that an imprint that size made in blood would get lighter within 13 days as opposed to darker?
So state, we've already asked this question.
Well, this is on a different imprint of a different size.
But we asked the same question.
Okay.
We've already been through the lighter and darker.
So your answer would be the same as the one we went through before, that you're not a serologist?
May I answer that?
Yes.
Yes, my answer would be the same. It's from experience.
Right. But you're not a serologist?
No.
To the base, you're aware of the fact that Dr. Lee is regarded as one of the foremost serologists.
Overruled.
Again, I've stated my knowledge of his qualifications. I don't work with Dr. Lee, and I don't have very extensive knowledge of exactly what his strong points are in terms of experience.
Well, you indicated, I think first you said you hadn't read any of his books, and then you indicated
Counsel, we've
that you...
gone through this. We went through this last week.
Well, any of the books that you skimmed of Dr. Lee.
Counsel, move on.
Now, you do not have a close-up, direct picture of this tile from June 13th.
Not that part of it, no.
And basically, what you told this jury before is that you were looking at some overall shots, and looking at those overall shots, in your opinion, you could not see this imprint.
The large photographs, which I had labeled, starting with E on 1 and going through, I think, L, M, and O, which were general scene shots, but you could see the tiles fairly well. I could not see that impression on the 10th row of tiles, which is where that's from.
Now, these...
I'm sorry, counsel. When we say that, we're talking about 1337A, is that correct?
Yes.
All right.
Now, these pictures that were labeled H, that you used on your direct examination, those blown-up pictures of the scene, you recall those?
Yes, the ones you just showed me at break.
Yes. I think that...
Mr. Harris, which exhibit is this?
This is
598.
598. And we were making reference before to the pictures labeled A, B, C, and then we had some labeling problems, J and K. You recall those?
Yes.
All right. Now, those pictures were created by you sometime in August.
These particular prints were created by me in August, yes.
All right. And that was in anticipation of Dr. Lee's testimony.
I was requested to print those, yes, for that reason.
And you have never received contact sheets of the pictures taken from the crime scene from the Los Angeles Police Department.
No.
And are you aware that the defense has repeatedly asked for contact sheets in this case?
Sustained.
Well,
Sustained.
May I approach?
No. Proceed.
You were sent in August the negatives. Were you not?
Yes, I was.
And you then, from these negatives, were able to prepare enlarged contact sheets.
That's correct.
And from those contact sheets, you could then select out photos and do enlargements.
Well, no, from the original negatives, not the
From-
contact sheets.
The contact sheets directed your attention to the picture. You were then
Right.
able to select it and do
It
enlargements.
saves time, rather than enlarge everything to that
Sure.
size, which would be very costly and time-consuming.
And would you not agree that these pictures that you created in August were of a better quality than the ones that had previously been provided to you by the Los Angeles Police Department?
Which ones are you referring to?
A, B, C, J, K.
Overruled.
I had seen smaller pictures of those. I had not requested larger pictures at that time because my examination was about the close-up photographs. But I did have an opportunity to look at the pictures they had available of those other frames.
And you also prepared a picture from the original negative of the socks that were found in Mr. Simpson's bedroom?
I don't recall enlarging a picture of the socks in his bedroom, no, sir.
To your knowledge, during this period, did someone else do that?
They may have, and I don't recall that.
Now, you went out to the crime scene and you took, recently, and you took a series of black and white photographs of what you found to be imprints in the concrete of these tiles,
That's correct.
some of which were footwear imprints.
That's correct.
Now, with respect to, we can take that one down for a moment, thank you. Now, with respect to 1337B, the three parallel line imprints, and 1337A, okay, you have these in mind?
Yes.
You are not telling the jury that any of those imprints in concrete that you took pictures of recently formed these parallel line imprints in 1337A and 1337B.
No, not just the wavy line and the one in your right hand, whichever that is.
Just the wavy line.
Yes.
Okay. So as far as 1337A, those imprints labeled by Dr. Lee PLP, SP, and 1337B, the one labeled PLP, those were not made from the indentations in the concrete.
That's correct.
And from the indentations in the concrete, you were asked, withdrawn, you were asked on direct examination whether or not those indentations you found and photographed in the concrete could have caused the imperfections and the unevenness in color of the various tiles that one sees in the overall pictures that you recently blew up?
That certainly could be a part of it, but by no means is it all of it.
And did you not tell us that the dark splotchy areas that you saw in the overall pictures and various imperfections, that no one could exclude the possibility that there are other footwear impressions there from just looking at the overall shots?
Are we talking about on June 13th in blood?
We're talking about the overall. You recall that there was one point in Dr. Lee's testimony when he saw these new pictures that you created, that he testified that he saw impressions, dark impressions in the tiles that could be imprints.
I recall strongly one area which I believe at the end of his testimony on recross by Mr. Goldberg, that he just all of a sudden made a general statement pointing to those photographs which were just up here, those enlarged ones that I had made, that there were imprints everywhere.
Well,
I think he might have even called them shoe prints, and I don't recall the exact quote, but I know he certainly referred to them as imprints, and the implication were that the walkway, there was many things on the walkway, and he made a fairly general statement about you could see things everywhere.
well,
So you'd have to get the exact quote out. I can't remember it.
Well,
but I was concerned about that statement.
well, if you're concerned about that statement, would it behoove you to be very specific about it, do you think?
I'm being as specific as I can without being inside of Dr. Lee's mind.
Well, in anywhere did he say that when he looked down that walkway that he could see a shoe print?
There was an open inference. I don't know what he meant.
I only asked, did he say that?
And I'm answering you, I don't know what he meant. He said imprints or shoe prints. There were many of them on that walkway, and he pointed to those photographs in answer to Mr. Goldberg.
So you think that he said that one of the dark splotchy areas was a shoe print?
I don't know what in his mind he was specifically pointing to. He referred to those general photographs.
I'm only asking you about what he said.
Objection is argumentative now.
Sustained.
Now, in your testimony here, did you not state that in the overall shot, looking at the unevenness, color, and various stains and weathering of the concrete stile since the walkway was put there, that you can see various lighter or darker areas of imperfections, and it's impossible to tell what they are?
Yes, I'd be happy to show those if we could put that chart back up.
No, but is that what you said?
Yes, it is.
And did you also say that in a very loose sense, if I were asked, or anyone, including Dr. Lee, to look at this, and you see these various dark splotchy areas and imperfections, that you cannot exclude the possibility that there are other footwear impressions, of course, but you can't say that there are footwear impressions there either?
That's a whole lot different than what he stated in his testimony.
That's what you think?
Can I exclude the possibility
I'm
that...
only asking about what you said.
I'm trying to explain that. I can't...
Is that what you said?
Objection, Your Honor.
Now, the question is that what you said?
Would you read it back again?
Sure. So in a very loose sense, you could look at it if you were asked, if I were asked, or anyone, including Dr. Lee, to look at this and say, do you see these various dark splotchy areas and various imperfections? Can you exclude the possibility that there are other footwear impressions? Of course you couldn't. But these are, from my inspection of the scene in these photographs, there's nothing that you could look at, in my opinion, that looks like a shoe impression other than the ones that I have previously testified to.
In a very loose sense, yes. That's exactly what I said.
Now, I understand it's your position that the parallel line imprints reflected on 1337 and identified by Dr. Lee, in your opinion, based on your previous testimony, you don't believe could have been present on June 12th.
That's correct.
However, based on the previous discussion we had this morning, you would agree that, as far as you know, people from the Los Angeles Police Department did not use enhancement techniques on other areas of that walkway on June 12th?
Objection asked and answered, speculation.
Oral.
Am I aware if they used enhancement techniques? No.
Okay. Now, with respect, however, to the imprints on the envelope, the piece of paper, and Mr. Goldman's jeans, would you agree, based on the photographic evidence you've seen, that those were present on June 12th and June 13th?
What was present? The parallel?
The parallel line imprints on the envelope, the piece of paper, and the imprints on Mr. Goldman's jeans.
In contrast to the exhibit you just showed me on tile 10?
I'm asking you a very simple question, and perhaps,
Sustained.
let me just ask you this.
It's a compound question.
All right, I'll take it one by one. Would you agree that the parallel line imprint impressions on the envelope from the photographic evidence you've seen were there on June 12th?
Yes.
Would you agree that the parallel line imprint impressions on the piece of paper were there June 12th?
Yes.
Would you agree that the imprints on Mr. Goldman's jeans identified by Dr. Lee were there on June 12th?
12th or 13th, I believe is the correct date, yes.
As part of the 95% of Dr. Lee's testimony that you recall hearing and seeing, do you recall what he said about the so-called accordion effect that made imprints on Mr. Goldman's jeans?
With regard to,
Objection is to be on the scope.
Sustained.
Well, you recall Dr. Lee's testimony. Maybe we could put up a board. if I may. Actually, I request that we actually, Mr. Harris, if we could pull that one out and place it in front of the podium. I think that would be useful. This is 1339, Your Honor. Imprint evidence in Bundy, imprint evidence on Goldman's blue jeans. Do you recall Dr. Lee's testimony with respect to this board?
yes, I do.
Do you recall him testifying with respect to certain imprints on Mr. Goldman's jeans that he detected something that he characterized as an accordion effect?
Same objection, be on the scope.
Sustained.
Well, did you testify on direct examination with respect to imprints on these jeans?
Objection has to be on the scope as well.
Oral.
Yes, I did.
And would it be important in your evaluation of imprint patterns on the jeans to consider all of Dr. Lee's testimony with respect to how various imprints were formed on the jeans?
Objection to be on the scope.
Oral.
Goes to agent.
Yes.
And you have no recollection of what Dr. Lee said with respect to an accordion effect?
Not specifically, no. Are you referring to the accordion of a fabric or a shoe? I don't recall, I don't believe what he said.
Does it refresh your recollection that Dr. Lee pointed out certain imprint patterns on the jeans that he characterized as an accordion effect that occurs when the jeans are folded and bunched together?
Objection irrelevant.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Objection.
Oral.
I'm familiar with that phenomenon.
You're familiar with that phenomenon?
Yes.
But you don't recall Dr. Lee's testimony with respect to identifying various imprints on the jeans?
In general, I just can't remember his exact quote.
Okay. Now, we've discussed before, and without going into specifics of it, it's your understanding that, withdrawn. Would you agree that the pictures taken of the blue jeans here are when the blue jeans are flat and they are two-dimensional representations.
Yes.
And would you agree that nobody except perhaps a very peculiar, thin individual would, when wearing jeans, have those jeans flat?
That's correct.
That it's a very important factor in considering how imprints were made on these jeans to recognize that there had to be a leg inside the jeans that would affect imprints made upon it.
That's correct.
And as I recall your direct testimony, you recognized the significance of this when you were talking about your arm and slapping your arm to indicate how imprints might be made on your arm.
I believe I had a heel over my arm, and I was showing how hard it would be because of the cloth conforming to the shoe so readily with hardly any pressure to make an imprint of just the interior of the heel over and over with no perimeter of the shoe showing.
So you would agree that the fact that the jeans are on the leg and the receiving surface is three-dimensional would have an effect on how imprints are made on the jeans by another object that comes into contact with it.
Can have a minor bearing on it, yes.
Minor?
Yes, minor.
Well, if the jeans are folded and bunched and there is contact from a flat surface with ridges and that surface has blood on it, could that not affect folds and the bunches, the kind of imprint one sees on the jean?
Objection, improper, hypothetical, irrelevant.
I can only speak with regard to the shoes, and shoes, if the material is bunched, like you're suggesting, and the shoe comes down on top of it and compresses on it with pressure, leaving a shoe print on it in blood when it's bunched, then when it's flattened out, it will separate, and those lines, there'll be evidence of that, evidence that you can recognize as a person that's experienced that, made test impressions that way, and recognizes what you're looking at.
Well, do you recall Dr. Lee testifying with respect to how these imprints were made on the jeans, that he considered the fact that it was three-dimensional and the jeans would be folded and bunched was a significant factor in evaluating these imprints?
Yes, but I don't understand how he could have known exactly what the scenario was since he wasn't there. You could have that scenario and many others, and you have many areas on the jeans, and they would not be the same.
Do you recall him testifying to any particular scenario as opposed to simply testifying that when a leg is inside the jeans and the jeans become folded and bunched, that's going to affect the way imprints look?
Which type of imprint? Again, are we talking of shoe prints or fabric imprints?
Well, Dr. Lee testified about imprints made in blood, whether from shoes or other objects, didn't he?
There's a distinction between them, though. That's the whole point, is that shoe prints are not like fabric impressions, and of the dynamics of what you're hypothesizing here is different for shoes as it is for fabric, because one's a soft material and the other is a very rigid material.
Well, let me ask you this. As I understand the way you have been testifying, you're telling us that you're not an expert in the way imprints are made by fabrics.
That's correct.
You're only an expert, you say, on the way imprints are made by shoes.
That's correct.
Well, in your last answer, you were just telling us about what imprints one could expect from fabrics as opposed to what imprints could be expected from shoes.
I have made fabric impressions, and it's mostly common sense.
So in other words, you're saying that you don't need any particular expertise about how imprints are made by fabrics. You can do it from common sense.
What I'm saying is you don't need any particular expertise to know that the scenario you're giving is one of many, many, many that could have occurred, and that you would see evidence of that, and that they would not, you have impressions on many different areas of the jeans which were made at different points. You're suggesting they were all made exactly alike with this compressed fabric. It simply doesn't happen that way, Mr. Scheck.
Did I say that all of them were made exactly alike with some compressed fabric now? Did I say that?
That was the inference I understood, yeah.
I understand that's the inference. I'm only asking you, is that what I said?
Not specifically, no.
And isn't it important, Agent Bodziak, to carefully review what another expert says if you're going to come into court and criticize exactly what that
Sustained.
expert says.
Sustain.
Do you think it would help to read a transcript?
Excuse me, counsel. Counsel.
Now, you have stated, and I'd ask you to come down and look with respect to imprint number 2 over here. Do you recall on direct examination that your attention was directed to the area of the parallel line imprint on imprint number 2 on board 1339?
Yes.
And this is, in fact, I think, where you had a discussion about your arm.
Yes.
And your direction was drawn to what I'm indicating here within the larger red line, a curved imprint.
That's
See that?
correct.
Now, you have indicated that you believe that that is consistent, in your opinion, with an elbow from fabric as opposed to a heel from a shoe.
That's not what I said, Mr. Scheck.
Okay?
I had a discussion with Mr. Diedrich, and we suggested, could that possibly be an elbow? And that was something for him to pursue, not for me to base on my experience.
Okay. So, you're not going to venture an opinion about whether it could come from an elbow.
No, my opinion is that it's not a shoe impression.
Right. And you don't want to say anything about an elbow because you don't feel qualified to state that?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, did you not say that looking within these impressions, and I'm now directing your attention to imprint number 2, the lines that are parallel do not always run parallel to one another?
That's correct.
And could you tell us which ones in particular you're pointing to?
Sure, may I get the pointer? Many lines in this area, and there's 2 right here, which are a little bit offset of what appears might be a continuation, but they're actually 2 that go in this direction, and then 2 that are, well, these 2 on this side are about like that, and these are just slightly turned. These down here are angled up a little bit more in contrast to those. Maybe I could get the other pointer. If I put this over one of these lines and this one over this line, you can see that they're not perfectly parallel.
Okay, just hold it right there for a second, if you may. Okay, just so we're very clear on what you're saying, all right, is that you're referring to, within that heel impression, you see 2 parallel lines.
I don't see a heel impression.
Objection.
Withdrawn. Let me state it differently. Within this curved impression that you would agree is about 3 inches,
There's no scale on this photograph.
when you did a
Be
blow-up of
be
this,
approximately.
approximately 3 inches. In the top pointer, you're indicating that there are 2 parallel lines that are in the direction you've indicated here. Is that right?
Yes.
And now you're pointing to 3 other parallel lines below and to the right at the bottom of the picture, correct?
Well, there's more than 3. It's hard to count because they're, but you can see, again, we're running with the fabric, and you're getting blood on a garment that's kind of on its own, just gathering up within that weave. And this is right along the parallel lines of the fabric, and so a lot of these lines, you can't look at them and tell whether they just happen to soak that way or whether they were actually from a contact of something. But there's more than 3 down here if you're going to count everything
Okay.
that looks like a parallel.
There's a series below to the right, and then there's the 2 that you've indicated that are directly touching the curved line.
Well, there's two here, which appear to be different from two more. This I wouldn't count as really anything because it's all run together. And then there's several down here, which again, they kind of deteriorate into just being blood which is in the weave of the fabric. So it's very unreliable to say what all of these are.
Well, when you in direct examination said, looking within these impressions, the lines that are parallel do not always run parallel to one another, you were referring to the two sets of lines you've just indicated.
Well, I was referring to the most obvious, the ones up here, the 2 and 2, and the ones down here. You've got some that go outside of this perimeter as well.
I'm only asking to the ones you referred to on direct examination.
Yes.
In the part of the testimony I just quoted, those are the ones you've just indicated to the jury.
Well, I don't think I pointed everyone out, but all of these lines have
Right.
inconsistencies in the angulation of it.
And it's your testimony that the bunching or folding of the jeans could not have created the difference in the way those lines are pointed.
I can answer that question, but again, I want to premise it with I'm not a fabric examiner, but I have.
Objection beyond the scope of expertise.
Well,
It would be more than likely that the inconsistencies of the direction of these lines would be of the inconsistency of Ron Goldman's shirt than it would be of jeans, which would be more like taut over the leg of him, be tighter.
Now, so the answer to my question is no, it couldn't be from the folding of the jeans. That's what you're saying.
I wouldn't begin to tell you exactly what happened at this crime scene. That's part of the whole point, is that you can look at physical evidence, and sometimes you can determine things, and sometimes you're limited. And I don't think that you can say every one of these lines that runs along the weave of the jeans is a parallel line caused in an imprint fashion, but the ones that you can see are not from a shoe.
Have you not seen parallel line imprints on the jeans that are against the grain of the fabric?
Yes.
And do you recall Dr. Lee's testimony that he believed that the parallel line imprints that ran with, some of them that ran with and some of them that ran against the grain, were made by a flat, thin surface coming into contact with the jeans? Do you recall him saying that?
I don't recall him saying precisely that.
Now, you're saying that you don't have expertise in the area of fabric impressions.
In terms of comparison, yes.
But you do concede, I take it, that there are a series of parallel line imprints on the jeans, some of them running with the grain and some of them running against the grain.
Yes, there are.
And if the hypothesis that you just put forward, that these imprints were caused by Mr. Goldman's shirt coming into contact with the jeans, would you not agree that that would require his arm or the shirt coming into contact in a series of imprints with the jeans to cause those lines?
Well, there's a series of
Objection,
different...
this is beyond the scope of his expertise.
sustain.
Do you believe, Agent Bodziak, you said, I believe, that you do not regard yourself as an expert in blood stain interpretation.
Objection asked and answered.
Oh,
And blood stain interpretation at crime scenes would include an evaluation of imprints on garments or fabrics such as blue
Objection,
jeans.
speculation, irrelevant.
My interpretation of blood stain analysis is blood pattern or blood spatter. That it would be limited to the passing of the blood through the air and landing on a surface and the physics of what happened to that blood. In other words, you would look at a drop of blood, and if it was totally circular, you could determine it was approximately 90 degrees to the surface, and if it was at an angle, the elliptical nature of it would enable you to measure through the science of physics the approximate angle, and that you could use this in part to reconstruct, but more importantly to corroborate or discorroborate statements that might be made by witnesses. As far as when it gets into shoe impressions or fabric impressions of blood, I don't believe that's within the area of blood spatter analysis.
Well, do you think that it's within the scope of blood stain interpretation at crime scenes that analysts will investigate how various different kinds of imprints are made by objects on different receiving surfaces?
Objection asked and answered.
Sustained. Let me see counsel without the court reporter, please.